From the advertising media capital of the world, New Milford, Connecticut, wherever that is. This is Mostly Automotive Marketing with Matt Wilson, a bi-weekly-ish podcast about all things automotive marketing. Now, here's your host, Matt Wilson.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Mostly Automotive Marketing with Matt Wilson, presented by Silverback Advertising, online at silverbackadvertising.com. Back with both arms. Very happy to be here. Thank you for listening. You know, I always talk about when I was the marketing director at my group, and I feel like I start off every episode with that. So I apologize. But when I was the marketing director at my group, one of my local stores was in the market that I grew up in. I grew up working in radio in the Danbury, Connecticut market, and my home store in that group was in Wilton, Connecticut. And so all the media that we bought and did was in the Danbury, Connecticut market. And actually, the way the store was, we were between two markets, between Danbury, Connecticut, and then between Stamford, Norwalk. So we had, multiple radio groups, multiple cable providers, multiple newspapers. I mean, that's from a long time ago, newspapers. That was like 2012. But we had to buy multiple media markets. And so it was a little bit complicated, but I was like, listen, I used to work in radio in Danbury. I know all the stations in the area. I know all the reps. I know all the formats. I'm just going to buy the radio. No problem. I'm not going to let these people rough me up, right? I'm going to go in there and be like, listen, guys, you guys probably remember me. I used to work over at this station, and I know what the ratings are like roundabout, and I'm just going to do it my way. And so I did. And I bought packages, and I ignored GRPs, and I ignored all the stuff I didn't understand. And I just said, I'm going to buy this package, and it's going to be this much. And hey, boss, we're getting a great deal. And so then, 7 years later, I go to work at an agency, and I realized, man, I didn't know anything. And I probably was leaving money on the table through buying it myself. Why didn't I get a professional to buy it? Oh, I thought I knew everything. We all think we know everything, don't we? But as it turns out, there's a much better way to do it. And for everyone listening who maybe is buying their own media, buying their own radio and television, and you think, well, why would I have somebody else do it? It's easy. I can just buy it myself. We're going to tell you why. So joining me now on Mostly Automotive Marketing with Matt Wilson. She's the owner and president at Zoom1 Media Advertising. Maria Corsaro is on the podcast. Hi, Maria. How are you?
Hey, how are you today, Matt?
Hey, good. Thanks for coming on. For those watching, I love the logo, by the way, of your agency. It's awesome.
Thank you. I love color.
I know, it looks good. So let's talk about media buying, because as you just heard in my wind up there, I was doing it all myself, and then I started at Silverback Advertising and started working with our media buyer, and I realized, man, first of all, she knows way more than I know, and second of all, she has all these tools to buy media. So for auto dealers in particular, I think it comes down to, I know my market. I've been here for a long time. I can do it myself. But, why should a dealer use a buyer or an agency to buy their media for them?
Well, there's so many facets to it. And I think a lot of business owners, first of all, like to try and buy it themselves because particularly if you're talking auto dealers, negotiators, they think that I know what I'm doing. I know my market. I can get a better deal. I know what radio stations are number one. I can do it intuitively. And really, there's a lot more to it. Some things are intuitive, but you really have to rely on the research to guide you. And a good media agency will provide you with the research to show how many people are you reaching in your target market and how often are you reaching them, which is really important. I often say people pay for spots, but what they're really buying is the audience those spots deliver when they're buying media. So there is a nuance to it. And a lot of people, when they buy directly, think that they're getting good value. And most times they're not. They have an account rep who comes into their dealership or their business and say, hey, I've got this great package and now's the time you want to buy. Mm-hmm. And although I think that a lot of the account reps really want to see the business successful, at the end of the day, their job is to sell the radio station. That's first and foremost on what they're doing. And they kind of are going to put their station in the best light what a good media company will do is basically look at everything objectively and the research and make decisions based on that versus selling. A media agency isn't going to sell you advertising. We are an advocate to make sure that you're deploying those dollars wisely.
I'm thinking back to it, like buying emotionally or taking taking the feeling out of it is, all right, well, one of the stations I worked at for 15 years. So I feel like I was the opposite. Like, I'm going to be hard on these son of a guns because I worked here for 15 years. But then it's like, oh, this station has this guy who I used to work with and he's a total pain in the neck. So I'm going to be tough on him. Or, oh, this rep's really nice and brings cookies, so I'm going to be nice to them. And when it comes down to it, that has nothing to do with what's best for the budget and for the business.
Yes. And I also get, because we buy media throughout the country in various markets. And a lot of times I'll get business owners that'll say to me, well, how do you know? You don't live in this market. You don't listen. I said, that's all the better because I am not biased. I don't have friends working at stations that I'm going to have more of a bias to, and I want to give them the business. We're kind of 30,000 feet up looking at the research objectively. So we have no allegiances to any particular media group or station, or I don't go golfing or go to lunch with this rep, or it's all about, okay, let's look at the data. Let's look at your objective, what you're trying to achieve, where we find those most of the people you need to reach most effectively and most efficiently.
Yeah, you don't have the like, well, this is the station my daughter listens to, so this must be and my daughter is the person who buys this car. Like, you don't have any of that to consider. And I think also, like, you have access to, or media buyers in general have access to tools that a dealer doesn't have access to, and also an understanding of ratings and how to use those tools.
Right.
So, what are some of the tools that a media buyer can utilize that a dealership or any business wouldn't have access to buying direct?
So obviously there's Nielsen ratings. There's also Scarborough data, which is qualitative. So Nielsen ratings will give you, adults 35, 64, age, gender. Scarborough will give you qualitative. I need to reach females 35, 64 who own homes more than $200,000, or, so they'll give you more qualitative data. Now, you can actually request that data from the stations yourself, but you have to know what you're looking at.
Yeah.
So even if you ask the stations for that data, which, if you really want to do this yourself, that's the information you need to ask for. It's not the number of spots. Number of spots don't mean anything. And stations will say, oh, I can get you so many spots. Spots are actually kind of irrelevant. You need to know how many people those spots are reaching and how many times they're reaching them. And you can only get that if you get that data and you analyze it. So having a good agency who does this every day, analyze the information for you, and then go in and negotiate the deal is important, because a good agency will also have an idea of supply and demand, because there's one thing about media is that everybody pays a different price, just like seats on an airplane. The guy next to you paid a different price than you paid, depending upon when they bought the ticket. There's a lot of market conditions that media buyers are aware of, and every market is different. You can have one media group own a multitude of radio stations in one market, and they have a lot more leverage. Or there's many media groups. There's so many things. Is it a political year? And then a good media buyer knows how to negotiate and kind of navigate those waters to get you the best value for your money. Getting the deal is half the battle. I always say that. You can get the most wonderful deal that looks great on paper, great plan, but if the deal does not execute properly, it's not worth the paper it's on. So a good media agency will not only get you a great deal or a good deal that you can better than you can do yourself, they will make sure that it executes properly. So you do get the value that you were promised.
Yeah, and I think I had written that down on my notes here was, I remember when I worked in radio, you had certain clients that would, want their spot times faxed to them. And that's how long ago it was I worked in radios. They wanted them faxed to you. I mean, I don't even know how a fax machine
Yeah,
works.
I remember faxing time.
Yeah. My wife was a traffic director for a long time, and she used to have spot times, faxing. Oh, so-and-so wants me to fax them their spot times.
And here's the thing, a lot of times they would do that because they wanted to kind of listen to it themselves.
Yeah, right.
Because getting pre-logs times that are planned they don't always execute. You're always better getting off a post log after that if you really want to know when your spots run, not pre.
So you make this media buy, and like a business owner or a dealer is not going to go through the buy after the buy to make sure they got what they were promised. So what will an agency do? They'll go through and make sure that what the station promised you is what you got.
Yeah, so you basically will go through not only looking at the spots, your rotation of spots to make sure they fell in quality day parts. If you're not buying specific day parts, if you buy what's called a rotator, you want to get quality equal rotation of those rotators. So we do a post. We get post logs with radio. You actually, with television, you get a post report. And we make sure that they not only deliver the commercials, but they deliver the audience, which is measured in, you mentioned it earlier in your intro, GRPs, gross rating points. Mm-hmm. And rating points are basically an expression of the audience that is delivered. So one rating point is a percentage. So hypothetically, and if a city has 100,000, if your demo is, say, adults 35 to 64, one rating point represents 1,000 people. It's just basic math. So we make sure that not only do they deliver the spots, they run in quality rotation. So we're getting as much audience for those spots that air as possible, and that we get all the gross rating points promised in the original plan.
What about streaming, right? So I know you buy media and they're like, oh, and we mirrored your schedule and doubled it on streaming. So you're getting a huge value there. How do dealers or how do agencies really kind of handle that sales pitch?
So streaming, you basically measure it in cost per 1,000 impressions.
Okay, like any digital campaign.
Yeah, just like a digital campaign. Our media, traditional radio, television would be in rating points. So you want to get an aggressive cost per 1,000 when you're dealing with streaming.
Okay, so because you're seeing a lot of that now, even aside from streaming, is the digital companies are out there selling conquest email, and they're selling OTT, and they're selling SEM and anything they can do to sell digital. But a lot of times they will try and package that stuff together, right?
Yes.
And is it important to kind of break that apart and make sure that you're not getting some things buried in the budget? And
whenever you see a proposal, you want to see a breakout of what everything is costing you. If they just kind of bottom line your cost and you're like, here's our overall cost per 1,000, and you really want to see, okay, what is my media costing me? Your day parts, have your day parts broken out. Make sure, when I say day parts, for instance, radio 5A to 10A, if you're buying it like that, what is that costing me? What are my rotators? A rotator is basically when you buy radio, for instance, you can buy 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. at night. And those spots can fall anywhere in that time frame. And they generally are less expensive than if you were to buy a tight like morning drive or PM drive. So you want to see the schedule broken out. You want to see what you're paying for each of those day parts. If you're buying streaming, what's your cost per 1,000? How many impressions are you getting? Are they targeted impressions, or are they just overall impressions? The more detail you have there, the better. And it's just basic math. How many people am I reaching? How many times?
Do media buyers have to be mean to vendors?
I don't think so. I just think you have to know, make the vendors understand that you know what you're talking about and you know what you're looking at. I don't think meanness gets you anywhere. I always believe that you get more bees with honey, but at the same time, if the media companies know that you know your business and you know what you're looking at and you understand, they're less likely to kind of try and, sell you.
Right.
And my approach with media agencies is, my approach with radio stations or TV stations is like, look, we want to build long-term partnerships. I'm not here for transactional business. You help my client to be successful. Why wouldn't they come back and spend more money? So it's really about building relationships, building partnerships. And, once in a while, if something goes wrong, do we get a little upset? Yeah. But most times I'm really solutions oriented. We try and find the problems before or preempt the problem, or if we see a problem happen, it's media, right? Nobody's going to die.
Right.
So and sometimes things happen. And my approach is to call the manager and say, look, this happened. How are we going to fix it? How are we going to make restitution? So this way I can go back to the client and say, hey, we caught a problem, but here's what we did about it. And be very collaborative versus trying to beat somebody over the head. I don't think anybody gets anywhere with that.
Do you find that radio stations and TV stations prefer working with a client direct or like to work with an agency or a media buyer?
I think it depends. I know that the account reps like to work direct with clients. Right. I think the nature of account rep is they like the relationship building and all of that. But I think with media agencies, it's more challenging for them because we know what we're looking at, and we're not going to buy the sales pitches. Working direct with a client, they're going to sell the sizzle of their station. And particularly if you get a business owner that is a fan of the station, and you're like, that's an easy sell.
Yeah. Yep.
We don't sell. Like if you're a big sports fan and you're into sports, you're really, really excited to be on the sports station. I did have a client one time who told me that their demographic target was women 35 to 64 or 54. But he wanted to be on the sports station. I'm like, but why? Well, I listened to the station and it was really validating for him to hear his commercials, which I get, and that feels good. But at the end of the day, you are not your customer, and you need the research to guide you to make those decisions and not make them emotionally.
I had a radio station who we worked with who they did something that I thought was clever, and they would basically host at our dealership a creative session for us, right? So they would come in, and the sales manager, these are stations that we had relationships with for a long time. Right. The sales manager, the salesperson would come in. They would suggest we invite our TV reps in. We would bring our video crew in, and then me and the GM and the boss and my graphic designer, and we'd all sit in a room, and they'd bring food, and we would just kick around ideas, and we'd come up with 15 ideas, and 11 of them would be terrible. But we'd come up with 3 or 4 that would end up being our campaign for the year. So they had this, let's do this thing together. But what it does is it makes me go, oh, well, they want to be our partner. So we're going to use them throughout the year. How much of that, if you're working with an agency, does an agency see that value? Or is it kind of like, well, that doesn't really matter in the long run?
Absolutely. First of all, I think those things are great. And I think it's smart when stations do those things that actually provide added value for the client. And I'm a big supporter of that. We've done that when we have had clients that have been working with a particular media group that had multiple radio stations, and we'd have all the managers and we used to do those brainstorming. And I think that's wonderful added value, and that speaks to partnerships. Yeah. So, and I'm a big believer of bringing the client to the station. There are some agencies are like, no, don't talk to my client, only talk to me. I don't believe that. I believe in bringing that the media groups should meet the clients directly. And if they can provide added value, because this is a partnership, they're more liable to do more for them if they meet them in person and they'll pull out all the stops versus just being a name on a sheet for the general manager to look at. Right. So I think that's really important. And I love those things. And if a station can provide added value, absolutely.
How much of wanting to buy your media locally direct is getting free tickets to things?
Well, I always tell my clients that if you want free tickets, tickets to games and things like that, go buy them. Have a budget set aside for that. That's not your primary focus when you're spending your media dollars. If they happen to give you tickets, great. A lot of times they would say, can you get me tickets to this? I said, you know what? I would rather leverage and ask, send in a chip or cash in a chip to get you more added value that will make the phone ring and bring you more leads. And then you can go buy your ticket.
Yeah, right.
But don't make that. It's nice if you get it and you want it, but I mean, I don't make that a priority. I wouldn't recommend that.
I used to have a TV rep who made killer chocolate chip cookies. And she would bring like a tin of cookies around. She'd get up early, bake them, and then bring them to all her clients, like a week before Christmas. And, she'd bring a tin for me. And I was an in-house marketing guy, me and my graphic designer, and then a tin for the owner. So if she brought the tin to us, she would know we'd eat them all before the owner even got them.
Right.
But so I called her up and I don't have a client where we buy from her anymore. And only to see if I can get myself some cookies, only to find out she doesn't work there anymore. So
exactly,
total bummer. But I agree with you.
Yeah, I had a client who was like, we got him an amazing deal, and I believe it was Spokane, Washington, and he had a friend who owned another business who's saying, wait a second, we buy the same station, but he's getting a free trip to the Caribbean. I'm not getting that. I'm like, but look at your deals. If you were to compare your deals, I guarantee you're not getting the same value in the deals because you bought a kind of promotional package that the station was providing. I said, if you want that package, but you're not going to get the same quality of deal. You have to really focus on what your priority is and not be sidetracked by all of that.
What do you think about promos? Like I remember buying a sponsorship for a book contest that the local rock station was doing, and it was a insert generic trip giveaway concert here contest, and the package was, I'm making up a number, $7,000 for whatever, and they're like, oh well, it includes 577 promos, and I'm like, well, I used to work in radio, and the sponsor is in the last 10 seconds of a 45-second promo, a jam between songs. I don't know that I see the value in that. But I only brought that up because I worked in radio. I used to produce those promos where the sponsor's like, oh yeah, we got to throw this guy's name in at the end. What are your thoughts on buying those?
Yeah, and a lot of times those promos, you're sold to multiple sponsors, so you're kind of not only sandwiched in all this information, but probably like 7 other sponsors.
Yeah, right.
So I usually try, when we go to negotiate, leverage those things for free or as added value. I mean, if I get them for free, great, but that's not something that I would pay for. It's, they sell it, and they usually sell it to people who are direct. And I used to be a promo director, and we call that NTR, non-traditional revenue, because at the end of the day, when the station's sold out, they only have so much airtime they can sell. What else can we package and put together? And it was my job to put together the packages. And the idea was we could give it to the sales department to sell. Once the inventory sold out, like, oh, what else can we sell? And they would put together I would put together these promo packages. And guess what? 85% of the time we would give them away for free because we couldn't sell them.
Yeah.
So when the sales department couldn't sell them, we used to give them to a lot of, and knowing that, that's why I try and leverage that stuff for free.
Apparently, the only people I talk to anymore are former radio people. People flock to their own.
Yes, that's true.
I was talking to a coworker. I said, all the great radio people I know are all former radio people. I know very few actual still radio. My dad is the only current radio person I know that's not former. It's funny too, because I do remember that, we'd have like a feature on the morning show called The Elevator from Hell, which was we play like elevator music, and you have to guess like what rock song it is. Right. And in the beginning, you're like, oh, this is going to get sponsored. It ends up just being something you throw in a client who, oh, let's give him this, or he's not happy.
The sales department still used it because if it was something to sweeten the deal, to close the deal, oh, we'll give you this. I mean, they still used it. It was a benefit, but ideally the stations want to sell them, but 9 times out of 10, they end up kind of giving them away, or, or it just goes unsold.
What about the value of sponsorships? I always thought that being next to content that people are listening to has value. And this may be a little bit of an outdated insight, because I don't know that people are necessarily turning to radio consistently for like news, sports, weather. Maybe they are. I don't know. I get all that information before I get near a radio. But I always believed that, if you could be next to content people seek out, as opposed to being buried in a stop set, that there was value there. What do you think?
Okay, a couple of things. First, I'm going to address, surprisingly, 67% of people who listen to the radio in their car listen to terrestrial radio. So radio is still very, to the masses. 14% is satellite radio.
I'm just jaded. Because I was a radio guy.
Everybody's bombarded with so many information. It's still very relevant.
Yeah.
But sponsorships, again, things that we try to leverage for free in our media negotiations, but depending upon how well branded you are in the market, if you're a brand new customer, brand new to the airwaves, sponsorships aren't going to really do much for you, because it's usually name and claim. Right. And if you're not well known, now if you're Dunkin' Donuts or McDonald's, those kinds of things have weight, because as soon as you say Dunkin' Donuts, or you already conjure up in your mind who that is. So there is already branded real estate in the mind's eye of the consumer. But if you're kind of Joe's flooring store and you've never been on the airwaves, a sponsorship is not going to give you that much value. Right. That's why we try and leverage those in for free when we negotiate a deal, because it does have value if you are on the air promoting yourself. But if you're just buying a sponsorship with no core program, it's not going to have much value at all.
I think it's just Dunkin', by the way. I don't think their branding is working. Dunkin'. If it's just Dunkin'.
It's just Dunkin'.
I do find that it's harder to hold radio stations, I guess TV stations as well, accountable for what ran or what they're executing, because I find, as a former radio person and friends within radio and former radio, that there's less processes in place sometimes in some of these groups to execute. They'll say, let's do this, and promise it and sell it without the ability to really execute it in-house yet. Is it getting harder to hold them to that?
No, not at all. I think if you set the expectation outright
right up front,
when you're negotiating, hey, this is what we expect. For our clients, we actually do a weekly posting report. Speaking of radio, we do not only spots, GRPs, impressions. And if you set on the outset, when you're negotiating, saying, hey, we're going to be tracking this weekly, and we're going to be working with you weekly to make sure this happens. But if it's like, hey, we do this negotiation, because particularly radio, they're not used to posting. Television is used to posting reports. They are held to a stricter standard, right? Because you can get overnight ratings and you can see real time. Radio is less so. People don't usually post radio. But if you just explain that to the outset in your negotiation, that's what you're going to be doing, then yes, you absolutely can hold them to it.
So if you set the expectation with the station, now this is how I do business, this is the information I'm going to be requesting, and when,
right,
they will say, okay, well, this person is going to be expecting this from us, so we need to
They're going to watch it. They're not
Yeah.
just going to leave it to the computer to, assign. They're going to keep an eye on it, and it's really beneficial to the client, and also helps the account executive who's on the account. We negotiate with the managers, but the account rep manages it with us. It helps them kind of stay on top of it as well. And at the end of the day, we make sure that the campaign runs optimally. That if the campaign for whatever doesn't work, because there's a lot of reasons why a campaign won't work, creative, messaging, etc. We know at least that it was not the execution. We executed flawlessly. There's something else in the campaign that is not working.
Before we wrap it up, let's talk about radio real quick, because we both used to work in radio. I love talking radio. And I believe in our pre-conversation, you mentioned that you were a promotions marketing director.
Yes.
That is how I got my start in radio also.
Yes, I worked at KYW News Radio in Philadelphia.
That's so much fun. Wasn't it so fun?
Radio was great. I love it. I still have a lot of good relationships with people I worked with. And now that I'm on the other side of the desk, I get to work with them in a different way. Yeah. So it's a lot of fun.
Same thing. I look at it like I'm looking, most of my friends that I'm friends with, now in my early 40s are people that I met through radio from like the age of like 18 to 30, whatever, when I got out of radio. I mean, I hired my wife was an intern that I hired.
Yeah.
And we didn't date right away because of the whole, you can't really do that. But
well, you know what? Radio is so personal, and I am definitely a fan of radio. I think it still has a lot of staying power because it is a lifestyle medium. People really relate to it. It's local, whereas TV, I think, has more challenges in the way I watch television, the way my sons watch television, very different. I mean, it's very fragmented. And I think, my opinion, that it's going to continue to get fragmented. But radio, there's just something about radio that is local, and people want to feel their own community. And it's a great way that they connect with their community. I listen to satellite radio, but I bounce back and forth. I listen to them both.
Yeah, I don't listen. Yeah, that people will ask that. Like, me personally, I don't listen to one thing. I have more options than I had 10 years ago, but I don't listen to only one. Sometimes I listen to Pandora. Sometimes I listen to satellite. Sometimes I listen to the radio. Sometimes I want complete quiet because my kids aren't in the car and I'm trying to relax. But I think the common perception too is, oh, well, young people don't listen to the radio. But I read something, and I wish I had it, but I've never been good with facts and figures and stats, that younger people are discovering radio.
Yes. And, it's funny you say that. And I know my son is just a sample size of one, but when I get in my car, I listen to satellite radio. Like I say, I bounce back and forth, but it's usually left on satellite radio. He drives my car and he has a local country station on. I'm like, who's putting on the local country station? And he's like, no, Mom, I love that station. And he's 18 years old. And you would think, like you say, a lot of people have these preconceived notions that young people do not listen to local radio, but they do. Yeah.
Exactly. But it is funny though, because you think about it too, like, okay, so, your cars have AM FM radios in it. And I know a while back there was a manufacturer that was talking about getting rid of AM FM radios. And I think that the, National Broadcast Association and whatever went totally bananas and they went back on it. But, I also, the problem is like, I have probably like my radio listening, if it happens, is in the car. I have one device in my house that like can listen to terrestrial radio. It's in my office here, and it's a Bose radio that I got for Christmas like 15 years ago. But so it's such a car thing for people, I feel like. Just like cassettes, like there's no cassette decks in cars anymore. I have a box full of cassettes of air checks from the late 90s that I can't listen to because I don't own a cassette player.
Right.
I think that's the problem. Radio, we got to keep radios in cars.
Yes, absolutely. And local. I mean, if you're stuck in traffic, you're going to turn your local radio news station on. If you like local sports, you're going to listen to your local sports station. So that's
probably my two like terrestrial radio hang-ons is if I'm going to New York City, I'll listen to News Radio 880, 88 or 880. Because that's, to me, growing up, that was like, okay, this is the news station, you know? And then sports. I'm a Mets fan, and there's something about listening to baseball on the radio that has always been cool to me. So I'll go, I think they're on News Radio 80, and I'll go and listen to wherever they are. And then I like to listen to the goobers call in and talk about, this guy's got to get traded for this guy. But you can't get that on your phone on Bleacher Report,
Right. Exactly.
Maria Corsaro, owner and president at Zoom1 Media and Advertising. This was excellent.
Yes.
I appreciate it.
Thank
I think
you.
we got lots of good information here. Anything else that you plug Zoom1 Media and Advertising while we have you before we wrap up?
Yes, well, thank you. We are your media advocate. We don't sell radio or television or anything. We are in your corner. We make sure we deploy your dollars wisely. So anybody that's struggling with, media, we're a strategic partner, and we'll make sure that you get the best value for your dollar and that it executes.
Thank you very much, Maria. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this. This was great.
I think that one thing that we showed here is that the landscape is complicated. It's not as simple as let me call up my radio station and get the rep down here and let's buy what's going on. And the other thing we didn't talk about either that I wanted to bring up was just having a person that connects all the different media that you buy. Somebody that knows. The person who knows what's going on with TV, knows what's going on radio, knows what's happening digitally, knows what's going on your website. There's a benefit to having somebody that can connect all those things. And a particular rep at a station doesn't know what you're doing outside of their silo. So if you have an in-house marketing person or you have a media buyer or an agency that can keep an eye on all the things you have going on that are siloed, there's a huge advantage to that as well. I think that's a new thing. I'm only going to talk to radio people on the podcast. Radio people are good people and fun to talk to. And from now on, if you're not a former radio person, forget it. You're not coming on the podcast. Thanks for checking out Mostly Automotive Marketing with Matt Wilson, presented by Silverback Advertising, online at silverbackadvertising.com.
Mostly Automotive Marketing with Matt Wilson is brought to you by... Wait, this guy has sponsors? Oh, never mind. This sheet of paper's blank. No sponsors. That makes more sense. For updates, info, future episodes, and more, follow on Twitter, subscribe on YouTube, like on Facebook, and connect on Frackle. You guys made that last one up. That's not even a thing, Frackle. Come on.